Wizards of the Coast just recently announced the inclusion of legendary vehicles as commanders. For their new set Edge of Eternities, they are introducing a new card type called Starships. And essentially with these card types, they want them to be possible as commanders. So they decided, hey, let's just make every single legendary artifact that has a power and toughness box have the ability to be a commander. And so now all of a sudden we're seeing a lot of cards that were previously printed now have the possibility of being your commander. The thing is though is that most of these cards are pretty trash. Now the reason that that is even the case is because they never really planned on this in the past. While yes, you might look at some of these vehicles and think that could possibly work, most of them, besides two that we'll be talking about today, are pretty unplayable unless you have it in some sort of niche brew. Now let's get to the bigger conspiracy kind of points about artifact vehicles being commanders. This might honestly be a ploy for potential sets down the future or potential Universes Beyond sets in the future. I'm not much of a conspiracy theorist, and I don't like to speculate on things like that, but slowly as we've seen more and more of what Wizards likes to do, and especially Hasbro likes to do, a lot of it is geared towards Universes Beyond nowadays. So having some sort of space set that's going to have legendary artifact vehicles, it's not a huge stretch to think that in the future they might also have some other IPs that are set in space that have spaceships that they might want to be able to use as commanders. But that is just me speculating a little bit. Let's stay on the main point, which is the fact that we now have access to a lot of these vehicles. Now, the first point that I kind of want to go over is why you would even want to play a vehicle in the command zone in the first place. And the first and pretty much only reason is how difficult it is to interact with. Now, yes, there is a lot of artifact removal, but there's a lot more creature removal than artifact removal in something like Commander. So in my opinion, these are going to be just as difficult or weird to remove as something like a Xenagos or a Purphoros, where they're a different card type and they're not considered a creature until a certain point. Now, of course, those also have the indestructible keyword, so those are a lot more harder to remove, obviously. A simple Abrade or Vandalblast will kill your commander, but in most cases they are a lot harder to interact with. The reason I even say this is because my friend has a Shorkai deck, and the difficulty that the entire table always has of removing the Shorkai value engine always seems to come up. While you might say, yes, artifact removal is highly prevalent, it's not as prevalent as you might think, and in most cases, the Shorkai never is able to get removed, because it's either never a creature at the right time, or when you do have that rare artifact destruction, they have a response to it. Besides that though, in an ideal world, you're usually going to have these vehicles act like enchantments, if anything. The difficulty with something like that is, most of these require you to attack or deal combat damage with the vehicle itself. So these vehicles are going to be very hard to make work, at least for the vehicles that we have currently. But there are two that I mentioned earlier, and I have a deck list for one actually. The first legendary vehicle that I did want to talk about is the Last Ride. Mono black is great, and you essentially have a 1-mana Erebos in the command zone. You can always play this on turn 1, and then be able to have whatever sort of strategy you're wanting, with just a passive card draw engine in the command zone. It's 3 mana, so it's quite steep, but maybe you can go something like a big mana black deck that accumulates a lot of mana over the course of a game, and paying 3 mana to draw a card, while not efficient, does become guaranteed with a card like this. So this one is somewhat playable. But the commander I want to actually talk about today is the Indomitable. The Indomitable came out with Lost Caverns of Ixalan and is a 4-mana 6/6 trample vehicle that says whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. It has crew 3 and you can cast it from your graveyard as long as you control 3 or more tapped pirates and or vehicles. Ladies and gentlemen, we now have access to a Bident of Thassa in the command zone, or a mono blue Toski, if that's how you want to look at it. That has the potential to be a 6/6 trampler in some late game beats, but usually you're not going to crew this thing. So how do we build a deck like this? The Indomitable is really interesting, and was the first vehicle that I thought of when this announcement happened. If you know anything about me, you know I love hitting people in the face with some small creatures and drawing a bunch of cards. And this is the ultimate mid-range value deck for your next commander game. So what is the primary goal of the deck? Well, it's really simple. Play a lot of flying or somehow evasive creatures in the early game, play the Indomitable on curve, and start drawing cards every single turn. You're able to really sandbag the game very well and just accumulate some of your resources that you're needing, such as mana, cards, or interaction for when you're trying to push some wins. So how are we going to be doing that? Well, we have an assortment of low-cost pirates that have some sort of evasion or have some way of buffing themselves up through something like Adaptive Automaton or Metallic Mimic or a Vanquisher's Banner. Through there, you will be doing some decent chip damage, but because you're tapping out every single turn, we want to add things like Dissipation Field, Raise the Palisade, and Propaganda to make sure that we're not taking too much more damage on the way back. This deck is not meant to be an aggro deck. You do not want to overextend by having too many pirates on the battlefield at one point. There is nothing wrong with having your commander out and having 2 pirates on the field and just drawing your 3 total cards per turn. 3 cards every single turn is going to be great because it ensures that you're hitting your land drops, it ensures that you still have some interaction in your hand, and it allows you to accelerate to the points where you can play something like a Kindred Discovery or some of your big thieving spells. And yes, that is our goal. These little pirates are not going to be able to finish a whole game off on their own. Dealing 3, maybe 4 damage a hit is not powerful enough for us. So our main goal is to use our opponent's creatures that they play to our advantage. We have a lot, and I mean a lot, of thieving spells. Cards like Agents of Treachery, Blatant Thievery, Blue Sun's Twilight, Bribery, Invoke the Winds, Mass Manipulation, Subjugate the Hobbins, and Tempted by Auric are all great. We then have some creatures that allow us to steal, like Tolarian Entrancer, Mind Flayer, and Emrakul the World Anew. Now, you might be thinking, when are we ever going to cast a 12 mana Emrakul? Well, when you play slow, you interact at the right times, and you're able to consistently hit your land drops and some of your ramp pieces, you can get to this level pretty well. Emrakul should allow you to win a game if you ever do get to that point, so 12 mana for a win, I'd say is pretty worth it. Now, in order to get there a bit more effectively, we do run 3 extra turn spells, so that in case we're just a couple mana away, or just a couple cards away, we can just rip one of these and be able to take that extra turn that we need. And then of course our last way of winning is through the Indomitable. Now that it is a commander, it will be doing commander damage. So even though it is a pretty slow clock, being 6 instead of 7, you still are able to hit them in the face with this consistently through the trample. And you're able to recur it every single time with your pirates, so that you don't have to pay that pesky commander tax. In terms of ramp, there's not a ton of ramp that we actually need. This is very low to the ground, and you're drawing a lot of cards, ensuring that you get your land drops, which is why we're running 41 lands. But we do have cards like Patchwork Banner, Malcolm, Nyx Lotus, and a couple of pirates that allow us to make more treasure tokens. Lastly, we have some of the Kindred payoffs like Distant Melody, Kindred Discovery, and Vanquisher's Banner. These are going to allow us to draw cards not related to our commander in case we ever do stall out or our commander gets hated out of the game a couple of times. If they somehow find an exile artifact card like Fabricate, well, I guess we're going to have to pay the commander tax. Oh well. This deck is relatively cheap, being under $100, and is going to be a very fun mid-range deck that I'm thinking about building in person when this rule comes into effect. These kind of decks are relatively easy to play, and I think the most skill that's going to come out of it and the difficulty is going to be relying on your opponents to have some big creatures that you can take. You almost want to go up against some green or red decks with this deck, because having something like a Mass Manipulation is going to help you get those 6/6 tramplers that you're looking for and severely lacking in a deck like this. But besides that, you have a ton of cards that are going to allow you to draw your entire library very, very quickly. And by entire library, I mean 3 to 4 cards a turn. But hey, isn't that basically the same thing? So, with this being said, what do you guys think about vehicles coming to the command zone? Do you think it's just a ploy for Universes Beyond in the future? Or do you think it's really going to fit thematically for the new Edge of Eternity set? Either way, this is one of the only vehicles that exist currently that really interest me, and it really kind of fits my playstyle. So I decided to build one of my own. And if you want to check it out, go check it out in the description below. Thank you guys all so much for watching, and I'll see you guys all